Hello everyone, I'm Justice Graves and I'm currently running to be on the school committee for the Narragansett Regional School District here in Templeton, Massachusetts, and today's video is going to be about a sensitive topic. It is going to be about racial and sex stereotyping and scapegoating. This is going to be a video mostly for parents, administrators, and educators and other informed members of the community. This isn't necessarily a video meant for children. This is more meant for people over the age of 18. It has been labeled as such, but I just want to make sure that everybody understands that before we really head into the deep parts of this video. And specifically when it comes to this issue of racism and white supremacy and racial and sex stereotyping and scapegoating, we are going to be talking about specifically diversity and inclusion trainings. Specifically, we're going to be talking about people who claim to be diversity and education and diversity and anti-racist scholars, but are actually perpetuating a cycle of racism and white supremacy within our own educational institutes, targeting students between the ages of 18 to 25, and then those people are educating people K through 12. And so this is becoming a very large issue currently in academia. It is an issue that I'm seeing constantly, and it is an issue that is very close to home. There's a school district nearby that is starting to adapt and look into doing things such as this in a way that is actually very racist and white supremacist, and I will get into that in very much later videos, but today we are going to focus on how these people actually lie to you and say that they are diversity and inclusion scholars when truly all they are doing is pushing their own racism onto you. I want to start off this video by saying and bringing up something that I said in my video, Common Sense in the Government, which is when someone tells you the truth the first time, when someone tells you something the first time, you need to believe them at face value. When someone tells you it in a slightly different way, they're trying to cover for something. They're trying to save their social image. And that is something that I want you to keep in mind throughout this video and throughout this discussion. Today, we are going to actually see some segments from a diversity and inclusion webinar from an anti-racist scholar named Kate Slater, who works at the Institute for the Recruitment of Teachers in Andover, Massachusetts, which is a part of the Phillips Academy, and who did a webinar again for the University of New Hampshire up in Durham, New Hampshire. This is a public webinar. I'm going to link the full webinar in the description, but we are going to talk about how she is perpetuating the modern cycle of white supremacy and is helping to push the ideas behind what I am calling the white power caucus, which are pushing this idea called critical race theory. And I want you to understand this very, very specifically. And so I'm going to transition over to my slides. I have a few slides, and then what I'm also going to do is show you full context segments for what I am also calling the Andover experiment, where this woman, this diversity and education scholar, as she puts herself, Kate Slater actually admits as the associate director for the I.R.T. that she did a social conditioning experiment within the city of Andover that actually that she believes did profound harm not just to the residents of another area and within Andover, but possibly had other long-term psychological consequences, and even uses the term that she is implicit. She is complicit, implicitly involved in the situation, and she really reveals that, and so I just want to reveal that information before we go forward. So again, this is about modern white supremacy and its cycle behind the white power caucus critical race theory. So how do they do this within a diversity education? How do they do this? How do they lie to you? What they do is they desensitize you to the concept of racism. They'll say things like racism isn't evil. They'll talk about how being a racist isn't really a bad thing, which shifts it from being this thing all the way over here that we would consider bad into something more gray and in the center. So they desensitize you to the concept. They also intimidate you, that you have to admit that you are a racist most of the time. They're trying to push their issues onto you. And that is something I really want to stress, that if you are strong in your beliefs that you aren't doing things that hurt minority groups or that hurt anyone based on race, you shouldn't be forced to admit something that is not true, because they have no proof of this. They will abuse you with psychopathic behaviors, and we'll actually see this in the way that this goes beyond everything. But as this escalates, this sometimes results in physical threats in the outside world, because what this cycle of new white supremacy does and what these diversity educators do over and over and over again is they're raising up people's anxiety, they're making people worry more, and they're causing more and more psychological harm that results in more and more aggressive action. in order to fix the system. There's a lot of gaslighting, there's a lot of, name calling that goes around, and there's a lot of self-shaming that as soon as you admit what their demands are, not what their demands are, but what their expectations for you are, they want you to they want you to videotape it, and they want you to put it on the internet so that you become a part of them. So you're already way past that if you're already posting videos and admitting to it online. Now we're going to get into what's called the 3 phases. Phase 1 is that they want you to call yourself a racist. They want you to self-doubt yourself. They want you to doubt everything that you do. They want you to make you think that everything you do, from eating a cookie to walking down the street to breathing to how you talk to anybody, is implicit in this issue of racism. And it is complicit in your racism. And it sounds ridiculous, but this is what she's going to do, and I'm going to show you very easily how she does this within the video, within segments of the UNH webinar. Phase 2 is what's called radical kindness. So what they do within radical kindness, it's not actual radical kindness, it's normalizing abuse. So if you're at one of these diversity and inclusion panels and one of these anti-racist scholars happens to be on it, what will happen is that they will try and get, let's say someone is having emotional distress in the audience because you're talking about a hate crime, or you're talking about something very aggressive, something very, troubling. What will happen is that, let's say that person is crying, they happen to be a woman. What will happen is that that anti-racist scholar will scream down at that person to, quote-unquote, stop crying, those are white women's tears. You are being selfish. And then here's the next part, is that within phase 3, and all of these circle around and play off of each other within that foundation of dehumanization, of pushing their issues onto you. What ends up happening in the final phase, usually the final phase, is that you will actually enact racism. And so you'll say things like white women's tears, which is an incredibly racist comment, and sexist comment. They'll say things like black bodies, very dehumanizing, very racist. They'll go after Asians. They'll train you how to go after Asians. They'll say that their success is because of how close they are to whiteness, again, being very racist towards Asians. And then if they just have a ton of things in front of their name before or after calling themselves an anti-racist scholar, you know that there's a problem going forward, because they just can't stop talking about themselves. When you're at that final phase, you can't stop talking about your color, whether you're black or white. You can't stop talking about your sexuality. You can't stop talking about if you're transgender or not. It's all about you, and it's all about you, and it's all about you, and it doesn't stop. It's very much a worldview that believes that the world revolves around you and what you are doing, and not what you are putting out into the world. So this is very important. I have a diagram for this, and I encourage you, if you want to pause the video and to look at this. I'm going to scroll this up a little bit more. What they do, again, the phases that are within the foundation, they make you say that you're a racist. They normalize the abuse that happens to you when you are doing racist acts, and then you do racist acts, and then you're totally desensitized, and the cycle just keeps going and going and going. And it's all within that foundation that actually breaks your own self-trust, that breaks your trust in society, and that breaks your own will to be self-confident. And that's super important, and it's also explanatory as to how damaging this is within the educational sphere, and how damaging this is to anybody ages 5 to 25, especially those who have a lack of self-confidence or a lack of self-esteem. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to play you a short video clip. We're going to show another video clip in another minute. So this one's a minute long. The other video clip after this is going to be 2 minutes long. In this video clip, I'm going to actually afterwards explain how she goes through, how she sets the foundation, and how she goes through the 3 phases, the cycle that we're talking about. And then I'm actually going to show you what I'm calling and what I'm explaining as the Andover experiment, which is the horrible thing that she did, which caused great emotional and psychological stress to the community and to people who are minorities within that community of Andover and Lawrence. And so we are going to just jump right into this. I'm going to listen along with you and explain afterwards.
So first, I just want to clarify some terms for everyone. Racism. This is a word I'm going to say a lot over the next hour. So if this is something where you get like a little rubber band snap every time I say it, get used to it. I refer to myself as being racist, in that I have a racist worldview. I live in a world that's shaped by race, as all of us do. I have absorbed messaging about race and racism my entire life, whether it was conscious or unconscious. I've absorbed that messaging from my parents, from my friends, from my classmates, from my teachers. And so when I say I am racist, I am saying I have a racist worldview. And this is not about morality. It simply acknowledges that my world and the knowledge that I have is socially constructed, and race is a social fact.
All right. So we're going to stop right there, and we're going to go back into looking at how she establishes the three phases and the foundation. So the foundation is that she is normalizing the overuse of the term racism, and basically even before this and even slightly after this, if you're talking about minutes 0 through 8 and even minutes 9 through 12, what ends up happening is that she talks about how being racist isn't actually bad. She specifically says that racism isn't evil. So again, she's shifting that paradigm from being all the way over here with being evil and putting it towards the middle so she can justify it. So she can justify her own issues of racism. She declares that she is a racism, so even people who are within this cycle, who perpetuate this cycle, are also in the cycle, so you have to understand that. So she, in phase 1, calls herself a racist. In phase 2, she normalizes the abuse of others and her blaming other people for her racism. And then phase 4, she says that race is a social act. So she's saying that it's an act that has to be done, that is a very specific activity that is social and through social conditioning. And we're actually going to watch a clip in a minute where she talks about it with respect to how she did a lot of harm in order to prove that racism exists. What she's really doing is proving that her racism exists through this social conditioning experiment in Andover, Massachusetts at the I.R.T, the Institute for Recruitment of Teachers. And so, again, and I just want to say this, believe her when she tells you that she is a racist, because she is a racist, and this is going to be shown in just a minute. But what I really want to point out here is that she does a lot of justification for what she's doing in order to make it more kosher, not kosher necessarily, but more adaptable and explainable for what she's doing. So I'm going to leave full context when I do this. We're going to go for about a little over 2 minutes on this video clip. This is going to be what the section that I'm calling the Andover experiment. I'm not going to cover what she says afterwards because it's just too long, but she also admits after she explains what she did here that she believes she actually caused a lot more harm to the communities of Lawrence and Andover than she actually originally anticipated. So she fully admits what she's doing is racist, and she fully admits what she's doing isn't really diversity in education. It's just an experiment because she has issues and she wants to prove that those issues even exist. So we are just going to start.
Because I really want to show how those terms that can feel very extreme for many of us actually show up in these very kind of subtle, mundane, everyday ways. So I work at the I.R.T. It's located in Andover. And part of our programming is that we have a summer workshop where we invite scholars of color to come be in residence on the Andover campus. Now, these scholars are 22 and 23 years old. They're adults. And so as part of the programming on the weekend, they are left alone to do what they want. The past few years, we have actually set very stringent rules on our students. And we have said that on Saturday nights and Friday nights, you can do what you want. But you cannot travel outside the bounds of Andover for safety purposes. Now, Lawrence is a town that's right next door to Andover. Lawrence has a very large population of people of color. For many of our students, who are almost all people of color, their inclination might be to go to a space like Lawrence. But we at the I.R.T, I'll implicate myself in this, set this bizarre arbitrary rule that simply said for safety purposes, we want people to stay inside the confines of Andover, which is a predominantly white town. Follow up to that. When a former colleague, who is a woman of color, accepted a position at the I.R.T, she was talking to a woman in human resources about where she might want to live in the area. And the woman said to her, quite blatantly, a woman of color, yeah, I would steer clear of Lawrence. That's really a place you don't want to be. So I use those two examples to illustrate both a racist view and a white supremacist worldview.
So, at the end, I just want to point out that she fully admits that she's illustrating her racist and her white supremacist worldview. She says it quite blatantly. She doesn't hide it. And in the minutes, after this, she talks about how she actually believes what she did was a lot more harm. I have talked to people in the area because I was so horrified when I saw this a few weeks ago about their experiences in Andover and in Lawrence and Methuen. This person that I know lived at the edge of Lawrence and Andover, Lawrence and Methuen, not Lawrence and Andover. And they talked about how they lived there most of their adult, not most of their adult life, but most of their teens, most of their young adult life, and what this social conditioning experiment has done. It very much reflects in the way that Andover treats Lawrence and that Lawrence sort of treats Andover. It's this very bad cycle. It's this horrible, awful, racist cycle, because what Kate Slater did in this circumstance is that she associated a non-zero crime rate with the minority population of Lawrence and associated that with being a place that is not safe for anyone to live in. Even people who are enrolled in her program that are not white or that are not the majority of this country. And that is a significant problem. That truly is an act of racism. And that is truly something that we need to fully acknowledge. Again, that the full webinar is going to be in the description, so if you want to see all of it, it's much more horrifying. She juggles a lot with the cycle, she juggles a lot with how she displays the foundation, but what she's doing is she's doing all of these steps. She's doing all of them repeatedly, and she can't help herself in admitting that what she's doing is wrong, but she wants to keep doing it, and she thinks that it's the right way to explain and the right way to teach people about it and to perpetuate that. And that's being sold as diversity and inclusion, and what that's actually doing is creating more people who are racist. Now, the people who are behind this, what I am describing as the white power caucus, are people who write a lot of literature that justify this, who are above all of the rules that are set within the other cycles. They don't really go through the cycles, they don't really go through the foundation. They're just white supremacists, they're white nationalists, they're just these awful, awful people. They're horrible sexists, they're horrible homophobes, they're horrible transphobes. And we're going to get all into that in the next video on the subject, because that is a whole other paradigm. I'm going to leave this here if you want to pause and look at it. This is really the cycle of modern racism, but what you're going to notice at the top here is that the untouchables really don't exist within this cycle, because they know what they're doing, they know exactly what they're doing. People like Kate Slater believe what they're doing is the right thing, but the people up top, you can tell in the way that they write and you can tell in the way that they do things that they understand exactly what they're up to. Common key phrases about racism that these people will say is that they will admit that they are racist. Again, believe them when they tell you that. They will tell you that they are teaching things that are white supremacy. Believe them when they tell you that. They tell you that they contribute to systemic racism. Believe them when they tell you that. And that they talk about, and she actually says this in the video, that Kate Slater admits that her skin color is one of the most important parts about her. So don't, they say pretty much the whole gauntlet and a few other extra things too, depending on the situation. Again, if they have a bunch of titles and then they call themselves an anti-racist scholar, you know what you're in for. They call themselves radical anti-racists, and they call themselves anti-racists. They call themselves critical race theorists under critical race theory. This is all really the same thing. And the gist of this is, I don't understand why people like Kate Slater are allowed to teach our youth. I don't understand why she's allowed to teach people at all at any university, and how she's able to teach the next group of educators, because this is going to cycle down, and it has been cycling down to the K through 12 level, and it is pervasive, it is destructive, and it hurts. And it hurts all students. It creates self-doubt, it creates lack of self-confidence, it creates lack of self-esteem. It's incredibly damaging to these students, and it doesn't actually solve any problems. It actually creates more, and it creates more racism within different generations, and it's a horrible, horrible experience to watch and to understand intimately. I hope this video was very informative. I don't believe that people like that, I believe people like Kate Slater are just evil. And I believe they shouldn't be in the teaching sphere. I believe, like all white supremacists, she should be shunned from society. And she's very predatorial. I would never let a predator teach my, child about sex education, so I don't understand why we would let an avowed racist, somebody who declares themselves as a racist, teach children about racism, or teach young people about racism, but apparently that flies. And I don't understand how we aren't talking about this. I hope this was informative. There'll be another video on this. And thank you for your time. Share this with anyone who you think would benefit from it. Thank you.